Make no mistake, outgunned, outmanned the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people. They are heroically now fighting for their country and for their very existence, their lives. Now, they're using outdated Soviet-era fighters, Ukrainian pilots. Guess what? They're gunning down modern Russian planes. On the ground, Ukrainian soldiers, they're taking out dozens of Russian tanks with American-made Javelin rockets. And meanwhile, regular citizens, men and women all over the country of Ukraine, they're picking up guns, anything they can get their hands on, Molotov cocktails. They're all preparing for urban war, some kind of insurgency. And on a remote Ukrainian island in the Black Sea, you had 13 Ukrainian border guards. They came under attack from a Russian warship. Instead of surrendering, they told the Russians they can go F themselves, and they fought to the bitter end. Listen to this courage. Every one of those people lost their lives that night, standing up for their country in the face of certain death. They didn't back down. And back at home, the president of the free world, Joe Biden, he won't even stand up to the climate change alarmists in his own party and expand American oil and American gas, exploration, drilling, all the things that we could do to ease the pressure on our NATO allies and our Western European partners, and literally remove the U.S. from our dependence now that he brought upon this country on foreign energy, including the millions of barrels of oil that Joe Biden in 2021 imported from Russia, 232 million to be exact. Now, Joe Biden has created what is a 40-year record high in inflation. That is hurting every single American. That's all because of his failed economic and energy policies. And these same policies now artificially reduce the world's supply of energy. That's the lifeblood of the world's economy. It has weakened our national security in ways too profound to even calculate at this time. And now we're relying on, let's see, Russia, OPEC, Saudi Arabia for the lifeblood of our economy. By the way, he inherited energy independence. He inherited America as a net exporter of energy. Joe's policies now have helped chase our European friends and allies and NATO partners right into the arms of Vladimir Putin. We should be the ones supplying them with their energy needs, not Russia, not Vladimir Putin, who they're making rich. And by the way, Joe won't even stand up to our allies in Europe. Right now, he's being rolled by Germany, Italy, Belgium. They don't want to remove Russia from the all-powerful SWIFT banking system because they're thinking about their selfish economies. Well, maybe their country is going to be next. Maybe they're on the list of countries to be invaded. And by the way, Russian oil could be cut off. And as a matter of fact, according to the Biden administration, the sanctions are designed specifically to keep Russian oil flowing. Now, that would render every other sanction, well, meaningless. It would negate every other sanction if you're going to allow Russia to stay in the oil and gas and energy business. That's where Putin is getting all the money to fund his territorial ambitions. Take a look.
What I'm saying is that our measures were not designed to disrupt in any way the current flow of energy from Russia to the world.
Now, this is the single most important sanction that Joe should have put on Russia. It's the only one that means anything. Joe is allowing Putin to get even richer as oil and gas is the lifeblood. It is fully half of Russia's economy. Without the oil, without the gas, without the sanctions on oil and gas, guess what? You're not going to stop or deter Vladimir Putin. You're only aiding and abetting him. Listen to this important question from our very own Peter Ducey. Take a listen.
What have you guys done throughout this slow-moving Russia crisis that has worked?
In what capacity?
Well, the president talked to Putin. He talked to the G7. He threatened sanctions. He put sanctions in place. Now he says the sanctions are going to take 30 days. Or about a month. Do you guys think the people in Ukraine have about a month?
Well, Peter, let me just take a step back and explain to everyone how diplomacy works and how our approach from the United States has worked. What the president has done is he has built a global coalition to stand up in the face of President Putin.
Yes, sanctions indeed, but not the one sanction that would be most meaningful, that would actually impact Russia the most and be the most effective. In other words, Joe Biden, his administration, they're doing absolutely nothing, which is sadly for them par for the course. You might remember last May when Biden did nothing after Russia hacked the Colonial Pipeline system. That caused massive gas shortages all up and down the east coast of America. And in June, when Biden did nothing after Putin started surrounding Ukraine with tens of thousands of troops and military equipment. In July, when Biden did nothing after Putin delivered a deranged message about restoring the Soviet Union's former glory, laying out his plans for the future. And on Monday, when Biden did nothing, when Putin told the world that he was going to take Ukraine by force. By the way, I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting we have a shooting war with Russia. I want to be very clear on this. But for crying out loud, could we at least put the sanction that matters the most in place and at least stop Russia from selling their oil and accumulating even more money and more wealth that is funding territorial ambitions like Ukraine? Could we maybe sanction Russia's energy production? That is the one sanction that would be meaningful. At least we could start producing more oil and gas right here at home, and then America could get rich. It would be great for national security. Wouldn't have to worry about Putin, wouldn't have to worry about the Straits of Hormuz or the Middle East. We'd create high-paying career jobs here in America. And at the same time, we would be energy independent, and we'd be able to help out our NATO allies and Western European countries that desperately need oil and energy for their economies. There's not a chance. Is there anyone in the Biden administration, that's not a total idiot at this point? Now, with Kyiv encircled by Russian troops, Joe Biden is headed for a long weekend in Delaware. That's just great, Joe. Biden is now fleeing the White House, taking off. He needs his rest and relaxation. My guess is by now he's probably had his ice cream and has taken a long night's sleep. It's been a tough week for Joe. What an absolute disgrace. During this campaign, Biden once proclaimed that a fifth year of Donald Trump as president would spell a disaster for Ukraine. As it turns out, 1 year under Biden was far worse. Take a look.
To state the obvious, and I'm ending here, I promise you, we have to defeat Donald Trump. Because we can't, this is literal, we can't get a damn thing done unless he's defeated. It's going to take a hell of a lot of work to make up for all the damage he's done internationally and nationally. His network of thugs and co-conspirators are going to continue to try to undermine our democracy in the meantime. Imagine what he can do in another year. Imagine what can happen in Ukraine.
Well, Joe didn't want that. That'd be bad for the family syndicate. Remember, zero experience Hunter. Joe Biden leveraged $1 billion taxpayer dollars. He said, you're not getting the billion unless you fire this prosecutor named Shokin, who's investigating his zero-experience son, Hunter, who's making millions, who admitted on ABC that he had no experience in energy, oil, gas, or Ukraine. Why do you think they're paying you millions then, Hunter? I don't know. Could it be because your dad's the vice president in charge of Ukrainian policy? That was the real quid pro quo that the media mob ignored. But back to the issues of today. Biden needs to turn around, get back to the White House, or if he can't do it and he's not up to the job, which everyday Americans are beginning to see he's really not up to the job, maybe it's time to step aside, let someone more capable, someone more cognitively alert take the reins, because this has the potential to spiral out of control really fast. We're talking about an evil, maniacal dictator with territorial ambitions that probably go well beyond, and even the Biden administration is admitting, well beyond Ukraine. And it's past time for devastating sanctions on Russian oil and gas. And if you're not willing to take that one hard step, that means you're not willing to put the pain on Putin that he deserves. Because without that pain, what's going to stop him from invading neighboring Poland or the Baltic states? Okay, well, if an attack on one is an attack on all, okay, that's the NATO agreement. Is that really going to work? If that happens, will NATO go to war with Russia? Anyway, it's either going to be World War III or we're going to abandon our allies, abandon NATO. NATO will be exposed as a paper tiger. Now, don't forget what happened in 1994 during the Budapest Agreement. That's when Ukraine, they agreed to give up their nuclear arsenal. 3 years earlier, in 1991, they seceded from the former Soviet Union. Okay? They were the third largest holder of nuclear weapons in the world, and they were holding on to those nuclear weapons. As part of this agreement, in exchange, they handed those weapons back to Russia to be destroyed. Russia promised they'd never attack Ukraine and that the U.S. and the U.K. would back them up, meaning the Ukrainians. What is the lesson from this agreement? I guess, number one, don't ever give up nuclear weapons if you have them. Number two, under Putin, Russia doesn't give a flying rip about his word, agreements, alliances, nothing. The only thing that Putin will respond to is strength. Donald Trump understood this. And by the way, now Europe and the U.S., they need to immediately take tough action against Russia's oil and gas industry. That is where Putin is getting all of his money. That is his greatest vulnerability. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.